None, just a motion to accept as presented, please. Councillor Auld. Okay, all in favor of that motion? And that's carried. So we'll go on to number 3.1. Our first delegation is joining via Zoom, and it is the Rocky Mountain House Speed Skating Club. And I will ask Laura to please allow our guests on the screen here.
Right.
Did we lose? Oh, there we go.
Hi, there we go. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you fine. Can you hear us?
Yes, and is Leah visible as well?
Yep, she is. Both of you are.
Yep.
Okay, super.
Okay.
I guess I'll start. Is that okay?
Yep, yeah, I'm turning the floor over to you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Burke and councillors, thank you very much for having us to be able to give the opportunity to present to council. We represent the Rocky Mountain House Speed Skating Club, and they are a youth organization within community. And we have we were made aware of the small grant that's available to community organizations that are hosting community events, and we've made application for the small grant, and just presenting ourselves to open up for questions. I don't know if you've all been have our letter of application, or if we need to go through that.
We do, but if you want to just explain, Kim, what your program is or what you're going to be using for the grant, that just gives the opportunity to the public to also be aware.
Sure, absolutely. Okay. So our club is a small club of 20, currently this year's 21 skaters and their families. Previous years, we have had the opportunity to have up to in the number of 30s for our number of skaters, but the last couple of years with COVID and some of the arena renovations had an impact on our club. Each speed skating club in Alberta has the opportunity to have a speed skating meet, and we are one of very few rural clubs, one of the smallest clubs in Alberta, so sustainability is very important for us. And the meet is basically the competition which invites clubs from all across Alberta to attend. Leah might have some more of the statistics as to historically how many different communities attend our meet. Our meet is for this skating year is scheduled for the 12th of February 2022, and as I mentioned, it's usually a full day event on a Saturday, and skaters and their families come from Edmonton, Calgary, Canmore, Peace River, as far as it may be. And they oftentimes stay at least spend one night in community, sometimes two, and are utilizing our food and beverage, our restaurants and retail as well. Our club has, along with other clubs, had some impact over the last year with COVID in terms of not being able to access many of our fundraising sources. And so we're hoping that the grant can help to bridge some of that gap and allow us to have a sustainable meet. And as I mentioned at the bottom of our application, we are fully committed to maintaining all COVID restrictions, and that may be in place at that time.
So the meet actually brings, as Kim said, a lot of skaters from the province of Alberta, but we have in the past actually had out of province skaters as well, as far away as the Northwest Territories and also Manitoba we've had, and we've also had some skaters from Saskatchewan. So the other thing is that because it's an ASA, so Alberta Speed Skating Sanctioned event, it allows for the skaters who attend the meet to qualify for events like the Alberta Winter Games and so on. And so that's quite an honor for us to be a sanctioned event. And again, as Kim said, it's rare for a club as small as ours to be able to hold one. And we've held one, except for COVID, successfully for many, many years.
That's great. Well, thank you for volunteering to bring that event to our community. Sounds great. I know it takes lots of volunteer hours, so appreciate your dedication. I don't have any questions. I think it's a great event, but I'm going to open it up to other councillors. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Councillor Narang?
Hello, ladies. I just have a question about the ice surface, because I think that when I very first moved here, I thought it was so cool that we even had a speed skating club. Is there anything special that needs to be done or prepared for the ice surface for the event? And it's totally just for my own curiosity.
Not for this meet itself. The ice surface is prepared at the beginning of the year when the ice is put in. There are special markings on the ice which are done, and then those markings stay for the duration. Anything happening for the meet itself is movable. It's the mats and the safety equipment that we have to set up and take down.
Great. Does anybody else have any questions? No? No, so that's great. Thank you. We will be discussing this farther on our agenda, and you're welcome to continue watching us online. So again, thanks for your presentation and your dedication to that group. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, bye for now. Okay, so we will move on to 3.2. We have a delegation from Rockian District Victim Services Unit Society. So I will welcome Marcy and Deborah up to the desk or to the table there, please. Thank you for taking the time to come and give us a presentation. We appreciate that. Okay. Yeah. You guys want introductions, or does everybody know our delegation? Maybe I'll just get you guys to introduce yourself. I didn't with the other one, but.
So I'm Marcy Tyson, the Executive Director for Rocky Victim Services.
And I'm Deborah Chenard. I'm the outreach worker for Victim Services, and I work specifically in the communities of Ochis and Sunchild. That's where I work in the satellite office. Also, if I get lucky enough, I go to Bighorn as well. So, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for coming. I know we had requested a delegation, so if I could just turn it over to you and you can explain your programming for us.
Sure. So yeah, the reason for our visit was the Truth and Reconciliation Call to Action, item number 40, which states we call on all levels of government in collaboration with Aboriginal people to create an adequately funded and accessible Aboriginal specific victims program and services with appropriate evaluation mechanisms. So I don't know if everybody here is familiar with Victim Services, but we're a nonprofit organization that works out of the RCMP detachment and have done so since 1995. We work within the RCMP detachment area, which is about 16,000 square kilometers and cover Sunchild, Ochis, and Bighorn First Nations. We're mandated to provide information, support, and referrals to victims of crime. And right now we're operating with five volunteer victim advocates, 4 staff, and 6 volunteer board members. And interestingly enough, through COVID, we actually acquired 4 more volunteers. So we've got 4 applicants in the process. So it'd be nice to have some additional volunteers. And yeah, with our Indigenous Victim Program, in 2017, the Alberta government decided to fund 14 communities with an Indigenous Victim Outreach Specialist. So there are IVOS workers, basically from Pincher Creek to High Level in various communities. And basically the program just kind of allows for outreach services specifically in First Nation communities. Previously, we just had kind of an office day or responding to calls on a as needed basis. So in 2017, we were able to hire a full-time position who is dedicated just to providing culturally safe and meaningful services within those communities. And I'll let Deb speak to kind of her specific role on the ground, but I did just bring some stats just out of, if anybody's interested. Our fiscal year runs July 1st to June 30th each year. And over the course of the last fiscal year, we saw a 30% increase in new files, with 17% increase in victims accessing services. And of those victims, 34% identified as Indigenous. So it's still a pretty significant number. We've typically, since 95, that's kind of been 33% has kind of been our average within our Indigenous communities. And our most common file types are domestic disputes and domestic violence, which ultimately account for probably 50 to 60% of our caseload. Theft, mental health act, assault with a weapon, sexual assaults, sudden deaths, mischief and vandalism, break-and enters, and assaults. So again, those are probably our main file types within all the communities that we serve. Pass it on to you, Deb.
So one of the things that, one of the first things I did was we don't call my position IBOS because it's kind of, I don't know, I'm going to just throw it out there and I'll just say it. It's kind of a government terminology. Like, would you have a Caucasian specialist? No, you would not. So I'm called an outreach worker. And my job is to be just physically present, and it's to build relationships in the community and to work with the community. And whether you work in the community or you don't work in the community, you meet people where they're at, right? So that's my biggest job, is just to meet people where they're at. And then it's to bring in those layers of whatever it is that they need for safety, a sense of safety. Is it their culture? Is it connections to an elder? Is it connections to support services? They call it warm transfers. So can I bring in, say, somebody from the Child Advocacy Center when a child, say, goes and gets interviewed? Can we work closer together so that we're not creating a sense of disconnection within the sense of services, because it is very disconnected, unfortunately, within the helping profession. So one of my heart and passion projects is to create that stronger sense of a container around people, that sense of circle of safety and trust and support, and then also to ensure that it is something that looks familiar to them and feels comfortable to them. And if that's bringing in their culture, then it's bringing in their culture. And sometimes it's not. It just depends on where they're at, right? So that's a little bit of what I do. I don't know if you have any more specific questions or in my day job.
No, that's really great. Thank you for explaining that. And you've also been here with Grandmother Turtle Lodge as well. So we do see that work that's being done. So appreciate all of that. Does anybody have any questions for either Deb or Marcy? Councillor Narang?
How is it for recruiting volunteers to the program out on the nation? So within the community, do you have victim advocates as well?
Currently, we don't. In the past, we have had people express interest and start going through the application process, but just life circumstances, they decided to opt out. And it is quite a lengthy process. You have to go through the RCMP security clearance process, and then there's the online training modules as well.
Does anybody have any other questions? No? Councillor Auld?
You've had this program up and running well before the Truth and Reconciliation come out. Has it changed your mandate at all, or has it always been on that focus that's coming through the Truth and Reconciliation?
I think it's always been on that focus. The implementation of this program obviously allowed for more funding. It runs on a separate grant through Justice and Solicitor General. So really, the program just kind of opened up more funding opportunities so we can provide a better service.
Excellent.
Okay, any other questions? No? Okay, well, thank you very much for coming in. We really appreciate it. And we know where you are if we have any more questions later on. Okay, thanks so much. Have a great day. Just give it a few seconds here. Thanks, Marina and Tracy. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on the agenda and we'll move on to 3.3. We have Staff Sergeant Dinsdale here today to give us a report on preserving evidence at a crime scene. So thank you very much for taking the time to come in. It's busy out there, so we like having a conversation with you.
Just a reminder, Staff Sergeant, the mic is turned on by that. Yes, that's right.
So welcome, and I'll just turn the floor over to you, Sergeant Dinsdale, and you can do your presentation.
Great, thank you, Alicia.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation to be here today. It's my pleasure to be here with you. So as per the request from the council concerning a presentation regarding crime scene management and preservation, and this is really geared towards the victims of crime, what to do perhaps while they wait for the police, or if they're doing things that they think might be helpful and potentially not. Also to provide some clarification on realistic expectations about what evidence is possible to gather, and perhaps dispel some of the misconceptions about the magic of forensic science, and that unlike CSI Los Angeles that I mentioned, evidence collected like that with those kinds of results certainly doesn't happen in an hour, and it's really portraying something that's unreasonable in a lot of situations. So with that, there is a presentation, is it up?
We do have it in front of us.
Oh, you have it in front of
We
you?
have it
Okay.
on our Surface Pros here. Which page, like, do you have it in hard copy there?
I have it in hard copy right here. Yeah.
Oh, is Laura putting, oh, okay, Laura's putting it up on
Okay,
there as
I
well.
just wasn't sure. Okay.
Good.
So we're going to go past the cover page and the introduction page. And we'll just talk about the third slide there. It talks about, kind of summarizes what crime scene management evidence preservation is all about. So evidence that we collect to provide proof of offenses is one thing. And then there's also another measure for evidence that's collected, and that's the burden of proof for courts of law. So we have to keep both those things in mind when we're attending a crime scene to collect evidence. I'm just going to pop this off. So the evidence and preservation of a crime scene must establish some, or must follow some established protocols and practices. This involves if we attend the crime scene and actually investigate it and examine it ourselves, or a forensic identification services does this, they will follow these things. So there'll be notation of details in detail. It's a methodical and uniform search of the entire crime scene. There'll be a photographic record created of the crime scene as they found it, and then of evidence as it's discovered. And then there'll be the proper procedures used in evidence collection. So if there's any forensic evidence collection techniques that have to be used for that specific kind of evidence, that has to be employed and then detailed as well. And then that precise cataloging of the evidence, and then these strict rules of evidence set out by the courts for admissibility. And that boils down to continuity of evidence, the scientific test if forensic laboratories are used. You know, that involves introducing the curriculum vitae of the lab technicians or scientists that did the tests. The courts have made it, they've created a high bar, and perhaps rightfully so, but it requires a lot of work for some of the more complex crime scenes. So on the next slide, it talks about the duty of the police. It is our duty to ensure that the following requirements are met at a minimum if we come. So if we're collecting evidence, we have to label each piece of evidence that we collect. That involves the time, date, and initials of the seizing officer on every piece of evidence, so that gets cataloged, and then continuity of evidence rules can be followed. We must be able to describe exactly where it was found, how it was found. That's where the photographic evidence comes in handy. We must be able to prove continuity of that evidence. So from the crime scene to our evidence lockup to the lab if necessary and back, that chain has to be very documented. And then describe any changes in the evidence since the seizure. So if we seize blood-soaked clothing and we're going to dry it, we have to document the change from the time that we found it as we process that evidence. So these requirements must be recorded as notes and then on the file as well in reports and file logs, and then photographically, again, documented to justify or to satisfy legal and scientific responsibilities. So that's talking about really, the attendance of complex and serious crime scenes. Next slide talks about types of physical evidence that we can be looking for. Of course, fingerprints is the first thing I think that comes to everyone's mind when they think about crime scene evidence. So we're always cognizant of looking for fingerprints. Footwear impressions become very important, actually, especially at property crime scenes and other crime scenes, because footwear, it's amazing the comparisons that the labs can do with footwear between an impression found and then footwear seized from a possible offender. There's some interesting things there. Tire impressions from vehicles become very important, especially if they're nice, good, clear tire impressions. We can match a vehicle pretty accurately based on tire impressions. Physical matching, so that would be broken objects, cut locks, those kinds of things. We can match cut locks to tool marks. So if we seize the bolt cutters from a potential offender that were used to cut this lock, the laboratory can actually match the cut lock to the bolt cutters and make that connection. Trace evidence, including fibers, glass fragments, those kinds of things from crime scenes. If we find them on offenders or other places, the laboratory has sections that can make those types of connections. And then the forensic laboratory work with DNA, blood, and firearms. So of course, they can match firearms from crimes based on bullet impressions, firing pin impressions, ejection marks on used spent cartridges, those kinds of things. Blood is self-explanatory, and then DNA as well. Everyone's kind of well aware these days of what DNA means, and the depth of proof that DNA can provide. Really, there's everyone in the world has pretty much unique DNA. I think the only exception would be identical twins. They may share a DNA profile, but pretty much outside of that exception, it's unique to individuals. So on the next slide, we talk about what the police do. And again, we see those processing of the fingerprints, and we're getting better actually. If we take fingerprints from people, we're on an automated system now where we can match them relatively quickly to the national database, even from here, whereas before we'd have to send them away in the mail and get that done. But the processing of fingerprints from crime scenes that are lifted as evidence is still kind of a bit of a lengthier process and has to be conducted by our forensic identification specialists. So on the next slide, what the police do, I'm being a little redundant here. So we search, we document, we record, we collect, and we compare all the types of different evidence that we can locate, being fingerprints. Bare footprints are the same as fingerprints. They're unique to individuals, and they can provide pretty solid evidence. Those footwear impressions, tire track impressions, object breaks, etc. On the next page, it breaks down the types of evidence again a little bit further about what types of evidence we can encounter at crime scenes, and then what kind of specialties we can bring to crime scenes to investigate them. So the fingerprints, again, fingerprint collection, like evidence-based fingerprint collections, lifting fingerprints from solid objects, take specialty training. Typically, it's done by our forensic identification specialists. However, we do have a couple of members trained locally who have received specialized training in being able to lift fingerprints off of objects themselves for comparison purposes. So we can do some of that work in a minor sense here locally without having to call out Red Deer. The footwear impressions, we can take photographs of this. If it's going to be casting or something to that degree, it would again have to be FIS. Bloodstain pattern analysis, that's a very specialized section. They have to come in from out of province, actually. We have limited number of bloodstain analysts across the country. So they come in. DNA, we can collect for potential DNA ourselves with swab kits and send it off to the laboratories. The laboratories are frustrating because of the backlogs and the length of time it takes to get the laboratories to do the work. the possibility of this evidence kind of exploded in the last 10 years, and Canadian police services across the country are seizing this, but there's still a limited number of laboratories that can actually do the work. So that created quite a backlog, unfortunately. Surveillance videos. We will certainly collect any surveillance video that's out there that people give us permission to have. If it's privately owned surveillance video, we can't demand it. We could seize it pursuant to search warrant, but typically victims of crime are cooperative, usually, so we can get that. Those tire impressions we talked about. In some crimes, bite mark impressions become important. It's kind of a gruesome crime to think about, but bite marks are a possibility, and we have specialists who can look into that. Entomology, again, typically with human remains and those kinds of things is where entomology comes into effect. Physical matching of broken pieces of evidence. So again, this is like locks, but even pieces of vehicles in a hit and run scene. If we seize those broken pieces of vehicle, the labs can actually match those up and be able to do it in a manner that makes it or leaves very little doubt as to it coming from that vehicle. Foot morphology, again, that's through your footwear impressions, hair and fiber, and then the tool marks that I talked about earlier. So there's quite a few possibilities to find evidence if it exists at the crime scene. So as far as expectations for the collection of evidence, the RCMP Forensic Identification Services are known worldwide. They do have an excellent reputation around the world. Very stringent training and testing and qualifications that need to be met by these specialists that do this. The United States often, the FBI Academy, all those pieces, they often work with us and consult our own people here. And typically we, well, not typically, always, we pride ourselves on being unbiased in the collection of evidence. So when it comes to investigating a crime, proving someone is innocent of a crime is just as important as proving someone is guilty of a crime. And if the evidence supports that, we're looking for the truth and what the evidence supports. So we have to be very factual and unbiased when we're investigating crime scenes. And again, what you see on CSI is not a realistic expectation of what crime scene analysis and evidence collection is going to produce for you. Sometimes it will, but oftentimes I think that leads people to, to have this expectation of our abilities and what we can do with a crime scene. So crime scene preservation. If you are the victim of a crime, you come home and your house has been broken into or your vehicle has been broken into, if you call the police and they said, yeah, we're going to be on our way, we'll be there whenever. Sometimes, in some cases, there may be a delay in the police response or ability to respond to this. So there's a few steps you can take to preserve potential evidence of that crime scene. So when we attend, and these are the same things that we do when we attend, so we're going to immediately, when you get home and you see it happen, assess what's done, what's been damaged, what's been done. And then protect any of that evidence, the entry point, any damage done, all those things. Human nature, we have to fight down the compulsion to immediately try and fix things and clean up things. You want to leave it as you found it and protect it from any other interference or any other people entering it as much as you can. So that includes family, the family pet, those kinds of things, get them all out of there, get them away from that area and make sure that no one is in there between the time you find it and the time that police can respond. Guard the area, which we would if it became a crime scene that needed guarding. Determine the extent of the scene and set up the barricade. We say barricade tape, but so if you look at your home and someone has broken in, if you can determine the path that they used, great, protect that path. Don't let anyone go in there because that's our trail of evidence. If you don't know, if you're not sure, be generous in what you're protecting. Maybe they went in every room. And if you have, I know it's not always realistic, but if you have the option not to even enter the house at all, you can go to the neighbors or family, do that versus going in and trying to see. So again, breaking that down a bit further. So the point of entry, that's very important because that's where we're going to find typically our tool marks. And then, especially if there's, this is where we're going to be able to see what's going to transfer from that point of entry. If there's broken glass that we're looking for, is there blood, is there DNA, is there fingerprints? Oftentimes it's a window or a door that they may have touched. You want to protect that as much as you can. Determine the path of contamination. Again, don't enter it if it's at all possible. You want to protect any potential evidence. So if it looks like they picked something up or handled something and they put it down, make a note of that and don't touch it and point that out to the police when they show up. If they ate a meal, if they took something out of your refrigerator, which is more common than you think, they'll have a snack and then they'll leave. Point that out to the police so that we can look at those objects that they may have touched or potentially handled or had to their mouth, those kinds of things. If it's outside, and again, weather becomes a factor in this, if you think you'll find footwear tire impressions that a delay in response might risk it being damaged by exposure to the elements, try and cover it. Get a cardboard box to cover footwear impressions, or some lumber that you can raise off the ground a little bit and cover up tire impressions, those kinds of things, just to protect it from the elements until we can get there and prevent that breakdown of that evidence. Don't presume, again, this is why I talk about making notes of details and making sure you tell the police, because don't presume the police are going to see what you see or know what you know about your home and your property. Okay, so provide very good detail in your statements and your conversations with the police. So oftentimes we have people who report things, perhaps, it was a break into their shed. It's not a huge rush. It's harvest. I'm busy. I'll do it later. I'll do it in a couple of days. And they do. They'll report it with a time delay. And then they'll bring us something from the crime scene that they said, oh, this was left, or this was touched, or this was moved. Okay. I get those circumstances and those considerations. If you are going to handle what you think is evidence from a crime scene and bring it to us, handle it with gloves and place it in a clean, dry cardboard box or paper bag and transport it that way. Avoid overhandling the object or, certainly touching it with your bare hands in order to gather that evidence and bring it to us. Preferably that doesn't happen, but I get there's circumstances that dictate. That's just the way things go sometimes. Photography. We typically photograph things if we attend the crime scene, but in those circumstances, like I just described, where perhaps you don't think it's important that the police come out here because they broke into your shed and didn't take anything, but they left the screwdriver or crowbar or whatever. Photograph it where you found it, and then bring the photograph with you when you bring us in the piece of evidence. Double check before you leave that the photograph is clear, because if it's out of focus or you smudged your camera or whatever, then it becomes smooth. So just make sure that camera or that photograph that you take is clear and shows what you want it to show. Infrared digital photography, most people don't have access to that, but this is one of the things that the lab can do for us in the event that we need to recover evidence that perhaps in this example, they're showing something that's been blacked out by a marker. Infrared photography can lift out that detail through the blacked out marker area. That's just kind of an example of some things that the lab can and can't do. When we talk about fingerprints, again, I started off by saying everyone thinks that fingerprints are the magic bullet of forensic evidence. And they can be, because they are very unique to individuals. And when we collect them, it certainly puts someone somewhere that will require an explanation if they don't belong there. However, I think the misconceptions around where and when a fingerprint can be left need to be kind of clarified a bit. For the most part, fingerprints are left on relatively clean, dry, smooth surfaces. And a fingerprint is basically the impression of your ridges and whorls and details of your finger left on that clean, dry, smooth surface because of the oils in your skin that leave that impression. If that piece of glass hasn't been cleaned in 10 years and is covered in dust, the chances of us picking up a fingerprint off of that are going to be slim to none. Basically, the oils in your hand then are just picking up the dust off of the glass and not leaving anything behind. Surfaces with a lot of texture, again, they don't pick up fingerprints very well, but dirty, oily, those kinds of things, they really, really have a hard time getting fingerprints off of those things. Not that we won't try and look, but just the expectation of finding a fingerprint in that circumstance is going to be pretty limited. And then what the fingerprint tells us, and this is when I talked earlier about the bar that the court sets for what evidence that we bring into the court means. So I have my car stolen, and it's recovered 3 or 4 days later, and they recover a set of fingerprints from inside that car. And they say, okay, well, we know who stole your car. Well, that evidence shows that that person was in my car, but it doesn't prove they stole it. And the courts won't accept that that fingerprint in that car means that they stole my car. It means they were in my car. So I need an explanation from them about why were you in my car, but I can't necessarily just say, well, it's obvious you stole my car. In my head, that's obvious because I don't know this person. They have no lawful reason to be inside my vehicle. And that fingerprint was located after it had been stolen. But that still doesn't meet the burden of proof to lay that charge. So again, it helps in our investigation sometimes, but it isn't always the final touch in an investigation to find that kind of evidence. A little frustrating, but that's the bar. I already discussed the fingerprints, I guess a little ahead of my, my presentation. There's just some examples of some actual real fingerprint impressions that people have left. These are whorls, and this is what's been left in people's actual fingerprints.
That's an actual fingerprint.
That's an actual fingerprint. All 3 of those are actual fingerprints from individuals, and that's what was left. So
It is bizarre.
yeah, they're quite unique and interesting. Not interesting enough for me to ever pursue examining them for a living, but they're interesting. So DNA. Again, DNA is a big buzzword in forensic science. It is vitally important to forensic science, especially in high-profile investigations. As like fingerprints, DNA, as I said, are unique to each individual. There is an exception, though. That's in the identical twin situation. Common sources of DNA include hair, blood, and saliva. That's typically how we find DNA and collect it. Sweat, those kinds of things, they all leave DNA. Now they're to the point in the science of saying like touch DNA, skin cells, like very, very minor contact with things is leaving DNA that as science progresses is more and more apt to be found and examined. The problem with DNA, and it's not a problem, but as I said, one, there's a backlog in forensic examination of DNA. 2 is the cost associated to forensic laboratory work. So I have to be a realist as your detachment commander and say that I cannot justify saying every backyard shed break and enter, if they touch that lock, we should be swabbing for DNA and sending it to the lab, because that's going to cost thousands and thousands of dollars per incident. And it outweighs the cost of the actual theft or attempted theft. And I'm sure that the town has seen some of the billing that comes back in relation to this forensic work. It's expensive. So I have to be careful, and we have to understand it's not right that there's a dollar figure attached to what lengths will go to solve a crime, but that's the realist, that's the world. And we have to bear that in mind. So again, if your shed is broken into, and you see what might be a spot of blood, yet we might not be collecting that to prove that your lock was cut off your shed and $150 lawnmower was stolen. Again, I get that that's not right. That's not in a perfect world, but can I come to you now as council in the town and the citizens and say I spent $6,000 and solved that $200 break and enter? So that's just the unfortunate reality of it. So the next slide says between fingerprints and DNA, which is the better method of identification? And FIS will tell us it's always fingerprints. Because even identical twins don't share fingerprints, but they will share DNA. There is a minor exception in that DNA world that is not an exception in fingerprints. The fingerprints will always be unique and individual. So DNA can link suspects to crime scenes, can be link victims to suspects through biological evidence that's collected. It can also be used for animals and plants. So that's where we can, determine people have been at a crime scene, not by what they left at the crime scene, but why they picked up, be it through plants or foliage or, dirt, those kinds of things. And it can also eliminate suspects in high profile investigations. That's very important because you don't want to be wasting a lot of time on suspects don't mean anything to your investigation. So footwear impressions, we talked about that, and I talked about the interesting ability for footwear impressions, and people will think, well, every Nike shoe of this model has the same footwear impression, but the lab gets into the details of very unique damage to the soles, wear to the soles, cuts to the soles, lodged rocks, those kinds of things. So it really narrows it down, saying there's no chance that it was any other Nike shoe because this shoe has all these defects in it that match what we picked up at the crime scene. And the same thing with tire impressions. So when they pick up a tire impression, if they get a good enough cast, again, they can look at the tire of a suspect vehicle and determine, the similarities in wear, if there's any specific or unique defects in the tread pattern or damage to the tire. Now we're really narrowing this down and saying the probability that this is another tire is very, very small. I talked about the physical matching of evidence. The example here they use is the grill off a vehicle. That's, one of the very common areas that we use, especially in hit and run accidents. So we can match up debris left at a crime scene with a suspect vehicle when we find it later. So where is the evidence? Almost all the evidence previously discussed is present at many crime scenes. Often it is hidden and not visible to the naked eye. Different powders, chemicals, and light sources are used to locate this evidence. So when FIS comes, the unfortunate byproduct of a real thorough scene examination is a mess. They leave powder everywhere. They leave, some of the chemical residue that they may be using to raise evidence. It's unfortunate, but sometimes some of the techniques they have to use becomes a little messy. So I already discussed this about fingerprints, about how they're not as common as people may think. So often criminals, if they're thinking, they're using gloves anyway. But dirty surfaces and exposure to elements really hinder our ability to find fingerprints. Security cameras, I talked about security cameras. I'll put in a plug for our capture program. It's online. If you have security cameras, by all means, you can go online and register your security cameras on the capture.ca website. That provides us with a database of where cameras might be located in town and really just speeds up the process of being able to identify potential evidence. So that's live. Those security cameras, though, can be very helpful, but only if they work and only if you know how to retrieve the information off of them. You'd be surprised how many people would go, well, the cameras are there, but I don't know how to pull the video. So, if you're going to do it, take a few minutes to learn how to operate that system properly so that when it needs to be useful, it can be. And then I already talked about the lab analysis. It can be very helpful, but it is expensive, takes considerable time. So we have to, in some cases, take a measured approach to that and see if it's justifiable to justify the cost versus the crime. And then I already discussed this a little bit. So finding evidence doesn't always mean a conviction. So fingerprints on a stolen car doesn't mean we can prove that theft. Crime scene attendance by our forensic identification services. We're serviced out of the Red Deer Forensic Identification Services Office, who services a large portion of Central Alberta. They're in very high demand and they triage their work basically. So if we have, a significant high dollar figure break and enter, they'll still be trumped by a homicide or something somewhere else. So we're going to be, either have to hold that scene longer to wait for them to come or determine whether or not we can gather the evidence ourselves to get to them and do what we have to do. And then the next one, sometimes you don't like what you find because But that it really kind of sums up what I put together to present to you today on crime scene, on evidence preservation, and what we do with it. So if there's any questions, I'm free to answer them.
Thank you for that presentation, and it's on our our agenda here, so public can access this.
Perfect.
I mean, we had hoped to have an open house or some type of something, but it's just not happening right now. So I believe members of the public, once they see or hear about it in the news, they'll be able to access this presentation, and hopefully they'll
Absolutely.
take a look at it. Can you just tell me again the name of that camera registry?
Capture.
Capture.
I think is it crimecapture.ca? Crimecapture.ca. Let me double check that.
Have we put that on our website? Do we know, or have we put that out there for social media, on our social media? Because I really think we should, and get as many people in town on it as possible.
I see that the last time I checked the website that people are finding it, people are registering cameras. That's great. No one else, only the public can't see who's registered. All they can do is go on, log in, register their cameras. The only people that can actually see the camera registry is the police. So it's not a tip off for criminals to say, oh, there's cameras over there, we're not going to go over there. They can't see that. But after the fact, we can look at a map where a crime has occurred, and then we can say, okay, there's cameras at, these 4 residences or businesses or addresses around there. And it really narrows down and expedites our investigative process after the fact.
Yeah, that's great. I think we'll look into that. Ask Laura.
And I don't know if perhaps insurance. I don't know if insurance companies will give you consideration for.
Mhm.
I know they will for having security systems or the
Yes.
cameras themselves, but if you mentioned that.
Okay. Councillor
there,
Fraser.
I'm just going to double check that website, so I'm giving you the
You're
right
correct.
one.
Crimecapture.ca.
Crimecapture.ca. Right. Okay.
And I just wanted to confirm with you, it's a database of the locations. So it's a list of the locations. It's not, you don't have direct feed into people's
No.
camera system, which I know I was talking to a few people. I said, well, I don't know if I want the police to be able to look at my cameras all the time. And
Absolutely not. No, we have no access to people's cameras. When you log in and you create your account, all you're simply doing is advising, like logging what your address, what direction your cameras face and might show us. But it certainly does not provide us access to your camera feed at any time. So after the fact, if there's the potential that your cameras may have gathered some evidence in relation to an investigation, we'll simply come and knock on your door and ask that you review your camera footage for that time period to see if it did capture anything, and then ask if you wish to share it with us. You're not obligated to share anything that your cameras capture with the police by logging into this system. It's still going to be with people's permission that we gather that evidence.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, that was a great presentation.
No worries. I had hoped FIS could come and do it, and I know that I think it was Clearwater County Crime Watch wanted the same
Mhm.
presentation. Unfortunately, theirs got canceled, so you get it ahead of them. But
Yeah, no, this is awesome. And as soon as we can do something in person, we would love to have that at a community open house.
I was really looking forward to it this fall.
Yeah, we all were. So, yeah, seeing none. And I know you provided us with some stats as well. I don't know. Does anybody have any questions on those?
I did. We're going to be coming up on the end of the quarter, so you're going to be
Sure.
early next month getting another quarterly report. So this is just kind of the crime stats up to the end of August, I believe. So it's giving you a snapshot and some of the trends. The only one really of crime gauges and trends really shows like a 23% decrease overall in crime for Rocky Mountain House, which is significant. The only area of increase was persons crimes were up 4%, which is concerning, but not huge. But property crime seems to be down across the board. And, it's good to see that, because when you see all of the stolen vehicles, we had a spate of stolen vehicles a couple of weeks ago, and it was getting a little depressing, seeing
Mhm.
stolen vehicle after stolen vehicle go. I think we managed to get some of those fenders into custody and charges laid. So
Oh, good.
hopefully that'll put a dent in that
Mhm.
for a period of time. Anyway, as long as they're in custody, they
Yeah.
can't be committing crimes. So
Councillor Narang?
Just talking about the vehicle thefts got me thinking, there's a new app that people are downloading. Have you heard, called Light Catch?
yes, Light Catch.
Can you speak to that from RCMP perspective?
I sure can. Light Catch is an app that was designed by a fellow out of Grand Prairie, I believe, Darren Boyer, I believe is his name. And it's an information sharing app. It's a social media app where people, if they are the victim of a crime, or they see evidence of a crime or something suspicious, basically they can take a picture or put on a post, and it goes out to all the Light Catch users in the area. So I have suggested to all the members, because oftentimes people are seeing things out there and that's not necessarily being reported to the police, which I would prefer to see them call the police first and then do the Light Catch thing. But oftentimes they're doing the Light Catch thing and then they might call the police. Oftentimes they need to be prompted by the administrator. Have you called the police? And then they will. But so it's interesting because it gives you all the Light Catch posts in a certain geographic area. And I think it's a 20-kilometer or 30-kilometer radius. So I thought, oh, this is limiting. This is quite small. But as a user, you can identify basically 4 different areas. So you can overlap 4 areas, and it becomes quite large, quite an area to capture. And then if there's posts even in Red Deer, if they're related to a post originating here, then you will see that connection. So it has a lot of potential as an information sharing app. And yeah, if people are interested, I there's no cost to it, and it's worth checking out. And it's a good way to share information. I'd like to explore how the police can sort of be involved to a greater degree in the Light Catch app. But we're just not there yet, I think, with that. But because we had something similar in Saskatchewan, but again, it was one way. It was called Everbridge, and it was a broadcast system via an app on a smartphone where we could send out posts about crimes. And then everyone who subscribed to that location would get that post from the police really quick. And but we couldn't get information going the other way. So this one has the potential, I think, to provide that two-way communication with the public. So we're going to explore that a little bit further, I think. But for right now, I monitor it, and I've suggested the members do so as well, because it could be very helpful.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Councillor Phillips?
Just a quick question in regards to the decrease in the property crimes. Is part of that due to the fact that more people are home because of COVID?
Well, all last year, I mean, since the pandemic began, we've seen significant decreases in crime overall, and in property crime really has decreased quite a bit. I do think personally that there's a correlation between the pandemic and people being home, not traveling, not going on vacation, working from home. Like people are just not away from the residences as often. So that, combined with some of the funds being distributed by the government to everyone who applied for it, meant that people who potentially might be using crime to support themselves didn't have to the same degree, because they were receiving funding, pandemic funding. So I hope the trend continues. If we see an end to that government funding and, people's travel habits and all those things go back to, we might see a swing the other way. I'll be pessimistically optimistic, and hopefully it doesn't, but that, yeah, I think there is a correlation. I don't know anything statistically that I could say, yes, there is definitely this correlation, but I believe so.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Well, again, thank you. We don't want to take up much more of your time, and know you're
Well,
busy.
thank you so
thanks
very
for
much for
coming.
the invitation. If I don't see council again before the election, best of luck to all of you that are running or rerunning, or
Yep.
or
Thank
best
you
of
for
luck
that.
if you're not running and you're done and you want to go on. Thank you.
As long as we're not running from you.
I agree.
That's right. Okay, thanks again for coming in today. Okay, so we'll move on to the number 4.1 to adopt the council meeting minutes of September the 7th. Please had a chance to read those. Councillor Phillips,
I'll make a motion to adopt the minutes from our September 7th meeting.
thank you. All in favor of that motion? Carried. So we'll move on to number 5.1 to delegation business of the Speed Skating Club Small Community Grant. They've asked for $500 to put towards their speed skate competition in February. I'll open the floor for conversation around that now. Councillor Phillips?
I think it's fantastic that a small, a very relatively small group of speed skating individuals can host something like this. I think it's fantastic that they can bring it to Rocky. I think it's a great feat.
Councillor Fraser?
I think this is exactly what the small community grant was created for. They're putting on an event, they're promoting their community, they're promoting their sport. I think it's a great use of that grant.
Any other conversations? Councillor Auld?
I'm just looking, I don't see where we're at with that small grant, but I think there was lots of room left in there.
Yeah.
100%, I think it's a great fit for that.
Okay, so just looking for a motion then. Does somebody want to? Councillor Fraser?
I will make the motion that council grant the Rocky Mountain House Speed Skating Club the small community grant as per their request.
Request of $500. Yeah, is that in there too?
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody have any other comments on that? Councillor Narang?
I just have a quick question. So they presented, because I know we just changed this, they presented to council as for their own request, or was that a requirement of the new? I guess I'm asking, do we need a motion to approve the?
Your worship, no, we do need a council resolution because it's under our grant policies, which has the major grant and the small grant. And even the small grants under that policy require council's
Okay,
approval.
thank you. That was really what my question was.
Microphone you didn't use. I just noticed that. Okay, seeing no other questions on that motion, all in favor of the motion? And that's carried. On to 5.2, Rocky District Victim Services Unit Society, just specifically for the Indigenous Victim Services Programs presentation. Just looking for a motion to accept that as info, please. Councillor Narang?
Yeah, I'll accept that as information or make a motion.
Okay. All in favor of that motion? Carried. 5.3, delegation from RCMP Staff Sergeant Dinsdale on preserving evidence at a crime scene presentation. Just needing a motion or looking for a motion to accept that as information. Councillor Brown?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, all in favor of that motion? That's carried. Moving on to number 6, old business. We don't have 7.1 is new business, and it is regarding COVID-19 restrictions that are ever changing. I'll turn that over to Mr. Kroos.
Thank you, your worship. Yeah, so the purpose of today, your worship, is just to provide council an update where we're at as a municipality with the new restrictions. So council obviously is aware that on September 15th, the province declared a state of public health emergency and imposed restrictions on September 16th. So those restrictions that were imposed on the 16th under Order 42 made mask mandatory in all public facilities, limiting to 1/3 capacity in those public facilities, and no over 18 age group activities. So in following those orders, the municipality, obviously we're required to do it. It's an order. We could be fined if we don't follow those orders. So the Christensen and the pool have complied with those orders. One challenge we are having is masking. We are hoping that our the citizens or the patrons of the facilities would just comply with the restrictions, but we are running into some difficulty there, and our staff are feeling the brunt of that. So they're getting it from both sides, to be honest. The people not wanting to wear a mask, being asked to wear a mask, or obviously taking it up with our staff. And then people who are wearing masks are questioning our staff why it's not being enforced. So we did, to make sure we comply with the provincial restrictions, and knowing that our staff are not trained in enforcement, and actually that's not their job, they're there for recreation purposes. I have hired a security company that will be manning the front door at the Christensen Center and at the Aquatic Center during specific times to ensure that we're complying, because the last thing we want to do is be fined for not complying with the provincial restrictions. Now, in saying that, those restrictions really affected user groups of the facilities that are over the age of 18. So not sure why the province did it this way. I mean, if you declare a state of public health emergency, then you should be imposing the restrictions to get us out of that emergency. But the province did an optional program, the restriction exemption program, or REP, that is optional for the town to impose or not. The unfortunate thing of that is it's not clear. The municipalities across the province are interpreting that order 43, differently. There's municipalities that are interpreting it, the facility doesn't have to follow the REP program, but the programs within do. So they are going down the path where their facility is still at 1/3 capacity, but if over 18 activity follows the program, they can still have the program within that facility. Now, there's other municipalities that are saying, no, we're interpreting that it's the facility. You're either in or you're out. So, for example, the city of Edmonton, you have to have a vaccine to enter their facilities, or a proof of testing within 72 hours, I think. So they're all over the board in the municipalities. Black Falls just posted yesterday, they're going to wait for clarification from the province. And that's where I would prefer our path to be too. Tomorrow I have a meeting with Dr. Hinshaw. All CAOs in Alberta do. And hopefully we'll have clarification on that. I think if she clarifies it, that it doesn't have to be the facility, but just the programs, I think administratively we can just go down that path. If that's okay with council. But if it applies to the whole facility, then I think it warrants further discussion with council, because it's not only affecting the users, it's like the spectators that go to those events. Now, 18, the age 18 is kind of awkward for us right now, because we do have the Rams, which are ages 16 to 21. And I know Mr. Ament and I discussed this morning. So under the current restrictions, if you view that group as an adult group, they're not playing. But if you view them as a youth group, then they can play. Now I know their own league is making their own rules on the teams, but I think today Mr. Ament and I made a decision. We have to call it one way or the other, so we're going to call them a youth until we have clarification, because they do have games for this weekend, I believe. I mean, it has to go one way or the other. The odd part about the REP program, even though you could require all your patrons to be vaccinated, your employees don't have to be. And that even applies to restaurants. If they go down that program, every patron that goes in that restaurant has to be vaccinated, but their employees do not. So there's a lot of inconsistencies in the program as it's rolled out right now. But I would ask council for a little time for us to have clarification from the province on the rep program. Another aspect of it with the new restrictions is we received one request for an extension to the Kickstart program because now those events are being pushed out because of the current restrictions. So we would ask council today to consider an extension if council wants to do so for the Kickstarter program.
I'd also like to point out that we are going to be having a new health minister as well. So who knows what other changes are coming. So I agree with everything that you've said, Mr. Kraus. I'm opening the floor for other comments or questions. Councillor Phillips.
Personally, I'm disheartened that the province has downloaded this onto municipalities because now every municipality can have a different interpretation, as Mr. Kraus had said, or different ways of implementing this. And you're going to have, and not just hockey, I mean, you're going to have every other karate, you name the group, that could go between towns that may be able to participate in one community, but may not in another. I'm very disappointed that the province throw this onto municipalities. It should have been a provincial decision, and then it can be implemented province-wide and there's no variances. But to throw it onto municipalities has divided the population even further, making it quite divisive and quite argumentative. And I just think it was not the best way to do it.
Councillor Narang.
Yeah, and I think further to that, this is not only a download onto municipalities because our businesses have the exact same decision to make that we do. So I just want that to be clear that we don't make these decisions for businesses either. So that download was across the board. We don't decide for businesses whether they're going to be participating in the RAP program or if they're going to be following the fire code restrictions, that sort of thing. So the download is not just on municipalities.
Councillor Fraser.
I agree with both Councillor Phillips and Councillor Narang about the downloading. I have way too many pages of questions about the program, how it applies. Just within our facility, we have town-owned activities where we run them, like the gym. We have user groups coming in to use the space that can't afford to rent 3 times the ice time because they need to have 1/3 reduction. We have groups that have ticketed events for the public that cannot afford to be at 1/3. So those events don't go on. We have private events being booked in our facilities. There is a huge range of potential problems, and I don't think we want to get in the way of people having events or playing sports or doing any of the things that we support them doing in our facilities, but without clear direction from the province and without a clear understanding of how this is going to be enforced and how that's going to be supported by the province. They've put us and all of the businesses in town that have to make those calls on capacity in a really nasty position. I don't think any business owner in this town wants to turn business away, especially at the end of this year. So absolutely, I think we wait to hear if they have come up with some of the answers to a program that was not very well thought out. But I do think we do need to have a talk about it when we know that.
Councillor Brown.
Just add my voice to the my colleagues. I think we need some additional clarification, as Mr. Kraus detailed, before we take any further action. End of story.
Councillor Auld.
Just the same sentiments. Once we hear from Dr. Hinshaw tomorrow and whether the province is going to streamline everything, we just carry on status quo for now.
I agree. So just to clarify though, the security that's been hired will be there checking for masks.
Yes, Your Worship. So they're actually called COVID compliance officers. There actually is a position in the world now for that. But they would be require people to have masks on entering our Christensen and the Aquatic Center at specific times.
So do we see that as being confrontational? So will they go out in the stands and make sure everybody's complying out there as well?
Your worship, it was more just to ensure people entering the building had masks. We'd have to review that if we actually want them to go into the stands.
Councillor Auld?
Would that, once they're in the building, would that not fall upon the user group that's bringing the people in to whatever program they're going to be running?
Your worship, I think, again, that's one of those gray areas. If we own the facility, do we have to ensure it's all complied within the facility? Or is it up to the group itself to make sure their patrons are complying? I would say it would tend more to us as the facility.
This is a tough, but we definitely need more clarification. Councillor Phillips?
And hopefully with this meeting tomorrow with the CAOs and Dr. Hinshaw, I know, yes, under 18 participants don't have to be vaxxed, but it doesn't talk about the coaches and the mentors and the parents that have to bring these 8-year-olds and get them ready for these events, whether it be hockey or, again, karate or figure skating or whatever it is. It leaves that such a gray area that we don't know if the parents can help their kids to these events and get ready for them. We need further clarification on that before we make a decision that gets trumped tomorrow.
We have so many people on both sides because there's, yes, you hear that argument that, some parents aren't going to be vaccinated, but yet they're in a room with kids that are, and other parents that are vaccinated. So it's just, it's a mess. It is a mess. And we do need to have it clarified. And these are tough decisions. We're all flailing right now, and we need to make the best decisions for our citizens as possible. Councillor Fraser?
I just had one question that maybe I wanted to put out if we get an answer back. I know that a lot of the sports organizations in Alberta are coming up with their own recommendations or requirements for league games. My question is, if we do or don't use the program and it does or does not match up with those programs, what does that mean for people, for teams from outside playing games here? Are teams going to other games, outside groups renting our facilities and our ice through those associations? Because there's a significant financial impact both directions.
Okay, any other conversations? So we're just going to wait. We're leaving this with admin. Councillor Narang?
So just so I'm clear, then what we are doing then is following the restrictions of the 1/3 fire code capacity and masking and social distancing.
That's correct, Your Worship. So I mean, yeah, we don't have a choice in that right now, right? That's a provincial order. So.
And encouraging everybody to wear masks in the facility so we can hopefully just keep them open.
And just for council's clarification, even with the REP program, Dr. Hinshaw came out with a news release last night saying, even if you adopt the REP program, please don't apply it to youth under 18. So even under that program, you would have a segment of the population that can be vaccinated, which is your 12 to 18-year-olds, but aren't required. So there's a lot of uncertainty, I guess is the term.
And we were looking at the BC regulations before, like earlier today, and it's 22 is what they're considering youth.
That's correct. And that was, in our consideration of the Rams, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, we looked at BC, and obviously BC took into account, junior hockey, which those ranges are from 16 to 21, because the age of 18 imposed by the province of Alberta, there's a whole segment of users that bridge that, like for junior hockey. So administratively, we just discussed the Rams being classified as youth.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Phillips?
And one one thing we have to be mindful of as well is that there is a lot of organizations and groups that are going to be starting here within the next week or so. Our next council meeting isn't until the first week of October. Is this something that we're going to have to come back and have a special council meeting for to decide?
And that will be determined.
When we have updated information tomorrow.
But a special council meeting is just, that's what a special council meeting is for, is to just determine if we need to, we need to, but with any luck at all, we're going to get more clear, or more clarification tomorrow, and staff can just roll this out.
Yeah, your worship. So I mean, that's, I think we're looking for a little bit of clarification. So if the province clarifies tomorrow that it can be by program versus facility, can we administratively make, okay, so the over 30 hockey can play, but they got to follow the rep program, but our facility would stay under the restrictions of Order 42, which
Oh
would be,
man, this is messy.
you know,
Yeah.
you know, or we can just bring it back to council for council discussion. It's council's preference.
Councillor Phillips?
I would like to say we could just give it to admin and have that administered that way. I think there's so many different user groups and each one is so unique that I don't know if there's a blanket answer for that.
We don't have any
And
answers.
we don't have any, we don't have an answer yet.
Councillor Fraser?
So I guess it's a hypothetical clarification. So if it comes down that it can be administered by program, everybody would operate under the 1/3 rule unless they wished their group to have the rep program, and then they could have a higher percentage of people in that particular activity in their space. That would be how that would work if it was a dual process.
So if it was a dual process, I think you also got to look at facility. So if it's in the Christensen and it's hockey and it's over 18 hockey, I think the players themselves can play if they follow the rep program. The people in the audience or the stands would still have to comply to the 1/3 capacity, because the group would have no control of the public walking in to watch a game.
Councillor Auld?
That's kind of the direction I was looking for. Like, if we should be able to rely on these user groups to do the best that they're going to do for their individual group, but we still need to run our program at the rec center and the pool as the 1/3, and then rely on these user groups to implement whatever programs they deem safe. That would be my vision going forward, is exactly that.
We have the curling rink. They require, I believe, Mr. Mann, they require a vaccine passport, correct?
Yes, I talked with the president of the curling club. They are instituting the rep program because they're adults. They also operate the concession and the lounge, which has to follow the rep requirements. So within our facility, irregardless, when the curling club comes in, once they pass the gates of either downstairs or the lounge upstairs, they will be monitoring anybody that comes in for the mandatory vaccination, because that's part of the rep program, and that's the only way they can operate.
And so how are the rest of the user groups managing this? Are they just wanting to, I don't know.
Your worship, I think, we have contacted them, and they're not even sure yet entirely. I mean, I think it's kind of a 50-50 type thing. But with the curling club, I just want to make clarification so that at least the public is aware. The curling rink is owned by the curling club, so they are their own entity.
Right.
So they can make that decision on their own without consulting with the municipality, because that is their facility.
Yeah.
So I just want to make it clear so the public isn't saying why them and not us. And then another consideration, I mean, we're talking recreation facilities, but we also have the Lou Soffit Community Center, and I think I'm 100% comfortable we'd be following the restrictions if we just looked at it on a per group basis, because they rent the entire facility. They have their own functions and events, and it'd be up to them to follow which restrictions in place. So if they went down the rep program like for a theater or an event, we just rent them the facility, and they would have to impose the rep program for that entire facility for their event. I think is probably I think we're still meeting restrictions that way, and it still allows for the option of the renters there.
Because then they would be the ones liable for the fine from the province.
That's correct. It is entirely their event. We have
Yes.
no control over the event. We're just renting the facility. So,
I think the main thing right now is just to keep up with the information and just keep in close contact with our user groups and the public. Councillor Phillips?
And I think it's fairly simplistic, even though it's not, between adult user groups and kid user groups, because under 18, that's very simple what needs to be done that way. And over 18, if they choose to follow the rep program, that's very simple. I think where the gray area comes, and this is where we need answers tomorrow from Dr. Hinshaw, is when you have 18 kids on a hockey team and 4 of their coaches aren't vaxxed and 2 of the time clock keepers aren't, how does that function? Because those people are there, the coaches have to be there for the kids to play. So how does that affect the kids playing? Is there an exemption for those coaches and the timekeepers? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that.
Councillor Narang?
Well, I don't see the province identifying specific roles within a hockey organization. If the rep program is chosen to follow, then they would all need to be vaxxed in order to participate and do their job. They would need to be vaxxed. If the organization follows just the restrictions, then they would need to mask and social distance. So it's both programs are really clear. The problem is that people don't want to follow them. So the problem is people are spending so much time trying to figure a way around it rather than just picking one and going with it. So I think we are overcomplicating things. I mean, as people are trying to function are overcomplicating it, because in my mind, it's quite simple. You have to just pick one. And I don't care if you're a timekeeper or a coach. You still have to follow within whichever one is chosen.
So, Mr. Kraus, you would like some direction on this. So I think I need more information from after tomorrow's meeting. So I don't know how everybody else feels, but it's what I'm going by. I mean, ultimately, we want to get through this. What's the best way to get through this? We want to get this over with, done once and for all. We still want to be able to let sports happen if at all possible. We want to maintain that. We want to keep that happening. And I think that's what I'm mostly hearing. But we want to make sure it's done safely. So, and we're still waiting for more information, just like everybody. So, Councillor Narang.
Now, this might not be valuable, but it's a huge frustration for everybody that we were given these choices of what to do. And I'm wondering if it might be worth time to really put a letter together and say, can you please give us some clear direction without downloading, like a sternly worded letter? Because I think it's super unfair to communities and to business owners and to these, people trying to get their events underway and their teams together. Like, would it make sense right now to send a letter, or would it just be lost? I don't know. Somebody needs to be advocating for the fact that we're all sitting down here floundering and have no idea what to be doing, and businesses are getting railroaded by both sides, and it's completely unfair.
Can we just wait and see what happens tomorrow? And we can decide from there. Does everybody feel comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Mr. Kraus, do you need a motion to just let admin bring back more information after further conversation with the rest of the CAOs in Alberta and Dr. Hinshaw?
Sure, your worship. Do you want to set a time to bring that information back to council, or do you want me just to send it out in a summary to council?
Sure. I think if you send it out in a summary, and if it warrants a special council meeting, then I will call a special council meeting to deal with that. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I'm just looking for somebody to make that motion then. Councillor Fraser?
I so move.
Are we clear on that, Tracy? No? Okay.
That administration provide a report to council after a meeting with Dr. Hinshaw.
Okay.
A report via email, do you put that in there? Or does it matter because it won't be at a meeting?
Yeah, no, via email is fine. That's clear.
So, okay, everybody clear on that motion? Okay, all in favor of that motion? And that's carried. Thank you. And thanks to the admin for taking all this time to sort through everything. It's confusing.
Yeah, in your worship, just consideration for extension.
Kickstart?
Yes.
Okay. So I have no problem extending the Kickstart grants out to make these events happen. So do we have to set a date then, Mr. Crost, or would you prefer that?
I would prefer that, your worship.
So say perhaps the end of March 2022 and go from there. Does that sound reasonable? Yeah. Okay. Somebody want to make that motion? Councillor Brown?
I'll make that motion.
All in favor of that motion? And that's carried. Okay, thanks you guys. So moving on to 8, correspondence for action, the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance municipal contribution. Who am I turning that over to? Mr. Crouse?
Thank you, your worship. So this is the annual letter we get from the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance to remain as a member in the upcoming year. So it does have budget implications. So we're just looking for council's direction whether to include it in the 2022 budget.
Sorry, where's the amount on here?
Your worship, it's 50 cents per capita.
Which is we are on the headwaters. So my thoughts are, I know I just had a meeting with them last week, and they're working on some pretty exciting things. So that will be coming forward to municipalities. They're trying to work on that now to get it rolled out for the new councils. So that's on riparian issues, and I'll be putting that in my report next week. So I believe this is a good organization to continue with, but I'm opening the floor to everybody else. Anybody have any concerns, comments? Councillor Phillips?
I agree that, this is something that directly impacts us because we are at the headwaters. And I know we've done it in the past, and I definitely think it should be something that goes to the 2022 budget deliberations.
Councillor Narang?
Yeah, I've attended a few presentations over this time on council, and it might be, and I'm completely fine with our contribution. It might be worthwhile to invite them to come and present about, what they've done in our area, or not even in our area, but along, what their whole program is, because they do a lot of really great work that I couldn't possibly speak to. But it was quite fascinating when I was able to attend their presentations.
And they have come in the past, and definitely they are willing to come again, and they are anticipating the ask after the new councils are elected. So they really like coming to council and explaining what they're doing. So yes, they are. Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I agree. It's a great program. I'd like the presentations. I've also attended other presentations in the past as well. We've invested in this program because it is so valuable. I don't know why we would stop investing at this point.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, so just I guess a motion to continue on as a member of the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance and pay the invoice. Okay, Councillor Auld? Okay, all in favor of that motion? And that's carried. Point 8.2, meeting invitation with RCMP commanding officer for K Division at the Fall AUMA convention. That's pretty common.
Yeah,
Turn that over to you,
so-
Mr. Crouse.
Yeah, Your Worship, we've actually already responded saying that the council will want to meet because they did put a deadline of September 20th on the letter, but they're also looking for the topics that council wants to discuss.
Well, I think some of the topics, I don't know if we would discuss that with K Division or not, but it's the retroactive pay and who pays the retroactive, who pays for that? Do we don't have any further direction from federal government on that?
No, Your Worship, we don't. Administratively, I think it would be a good discussion on policing service levels
Yes.
within our community would be more specifically required officers per population would be a good discussion. The RCMP have approached us in the last week looking for additional room for their detachment. So that would probably be a good discussion also.
Good. Okay. Councillor Phillips?
I know in the policing committee meetings, officers per population has been one of the topics we've been discussing. And also one topic that we kind of started touching on as well is the response time for calls. You know, a response time for a call in Rocky is much different than a response time for a call in Nordig, and how that impacts the overall budget for policing. And that may be something we can bring up with K Division because our detachment area is so large. That's a factor to figure when we're doing municipal requisitions and provincial requisitions.
So we would question the response times in town because that would be our municipal police dollars. That would be the question of the provincial police force then to question response times in the county.
Yeah, Your Worship, and I think discussing service levels and officers per population, I think that would be an all combined type of conversation.
Okay, is everybody happy with those suggestions to put on the agenda for the meeting at the AUMA? Okay, so I guess I need a motion then, please, to send those suggestions to K Division. Send Councillor Phillips.
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we send a letter to K Division with our concerns and thoughts for the meeting.
And you will give those to Tracy, the exact detail? Or do you have them, Tracy? Oh, you do? Good. Good. Awesome. Thank you. Everybody clear on that motion? Okay, all in favor? That's carried. So 8.3, McMahon Central Community Secondary Extension Request. So approved community grant. Who am I? I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Crouse.
Yes, Your Worship. So we received a request for an extension to this last year, approximately this time, because it was delayed due to COVID, and they've now asked for a second extension to the grant. So council did award them the $5,000 from the community grant request.
I see no other option except to grant this extension. I mean, it's absolutely no fault of any of our nonprofits for not being able to host their events. So, Councillor Phillips.
I think we're going to see a lot more of these requests coming to us, and I just, there's no reason not to extend it. It's not their fault that they can't run events or do things because of COVID.
So I'm just looking for a motion to extend the community grant for McMahon, the 2019 community grant for McMahon. Councillor Narang?
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
Okay. All right, all in favor of that motion? and that's carried. Thank you. Moving on to number 9, I'm just looking for motion to accept 9.1 to 9.8 as core for action. Councillor Auld,
I'll make that motion.
thank you. All in favor? And that's carried. So moving on to 10.1 CAO report. Turn that over to Mr. Kraus.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So all of the activities of myself, Ms. Reese, Ms. Coolidge, Ms. Button are in front of council. Council's any questions. Just going through mine for any highlights. So just like council know, we have met with the pump track group for site location. We went through the 4 sites with them, and we are actually getting more detailed information on each site because topography is one of the key factors for it. So we did a topographical look at them through our LiDAR system, and another meeting is being set up shortly, I think. So we are making progress on that. I did have a meeting with Miss Brandy Cox, who is the new Deputy Minister for Municipal Affairs. It was a kind of a meet and greet by Zoom. And we brought forward, and she wanted to know what we're facing as a municipality, any issues and challenges. So she became quite familiar with Rocky, and hopefully she makes her way out. It's kind of nice to see. That's the first time I think I've ever worked with a deputy minister that did that type of tour. So hopefully that works well. Other than that, have met with the county CAO on a couple of matters. We still not have received a response requesting an ICC meeting on the airport yet, but that it was forwarded to them. And we are still trying to work through the amending agreement to the waste agreement for the Eco Center. Also, and that's pretty much the major highlights. If council has any questions.
You were able to highlight the agreement between the county and the town as well, that new agreement that we came up with?
Yes, Your Worship, I did talk to Ms. Cox about that. She was actually pretty impressed. And like I say, that is our first one. To expand on that, this week I had a meeting with MNP, who is working for an arbitrator between 2 municipalities, and they highlighted Rocky as the kind of shining star and Clearwater County in Alberta for regional cooperation. So I spent a good half an hour with them going through our agreements, and it's all going back to an arbitrator. And I won't name which 2 municipalities are in arbitration right now, but the arbitrator specifically pointed them to us for best practices.
Louder for the people in the back.
So
Nice. I think that's great.
That's awesome.
I mean, it was intense. Those were intense negotiations, but at the end of the day, we all came away from there, I think, satisfied with what we came up with. And the county council and village of Caroline, they all worked just as diligently, and I'm proud of our outcome. So I have one question on your report, and it's the tour to Stickland Farms. Can we put that on our social media page? I thought that was always going to be on our.
Your Worship, yes, I will follow up with Miss Button on where we're at with that.
Okay,
So,
because it's really important that the public sees how incredibly important this is, and what a great job it's doing to taking that out of the landfill and hopefully saving a large amount of money at the end of the day when we can finally do a year-over-year comparison. Does anybody have any other questions for Mr. Kraus's report? Comments? Okay. I'll make a motion to accept the CAO report as presented. All in favor of that motion? That's carried. All right. Moving on to 10.2, director's reports. We'll start with recreation and community services.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council.
Good afternoon.
So before you is my report from myself and my managers. We've been very busy, and obviously the last few days have been strictly trying to sort through the provincial restrictions. One of the things that I would like to highlight is that because of the federal election, we had made the decision to delay putting the ice in on the Quick Lane Arena to accommodate Elections Canada. And so they've turned on the plant today, starting the cooling process and making the ice, and it will be ready for October 1st.
Nice.
Our ice users were able to accommodate. We've made some changes on the request, but majority of our ice users would get wrapping up for October 1st anyways. So unless council has any other questions related to my report, I'd be happy to answer.
I just have a comment on operations for FCSS and how it's stated that there's increased client drop-in at the FCSS office. I think that was a really wise move to move the FCSS office over to the post house. I'm really happy with that, and to see that they're more visible and the services now are more, I think, available, accessible. So
yes, they're
I think it's
certainly busy, and we find with COVID and all the challenges that people in the community are facing, the needs, the mental stresses and the social stresses that people are facing, having them there is, certainly is a more accessible spot. And obviously they are considered an essential service when it comes to the latest restrictions. Appointments are, it's by appointment only, but they're there and they're busy.
Services are still accessible, so that's good. Good, thank you. I don't have any other questions. Does anybody else? No. Thank you for that report. So we'll turn that over to corporate services. Is Betty coming in, or? I will do engineering and operations, since engineering and operations is here. Is planning coming too, or no?
Your worship, I'll be handling plan.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon, Mr. Shanks.
As far as the engineering operations report, do you have any questions?
Can I just say how excited I am to see that trail going in on the side from 7-Eleven? That is going to make that a commute for pedestrians so much safer.
It is. So far it looks really well. Can't wait till it's done so we can try it out.
Yes, I can't wait till it's done. But I just think it looks so good, and it's so long overdue, and I appreciate that it's getting done.
Mhm.
Do we have a number on the final cost of that trail? No?
Not yet. No.
No, okay. Good. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? Go, Councillor Auld.
I'm just curious, when we're starting to do the out by Pudgy's and out into Old Town, that replacing that water main now, when is that expected to be wrapped up?
They started yesterday and they figure 5 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
So we should be done before the weather changes. It'll be to a gravel state for the walking trail.
And then pave next year.
That's correct, yes.
Perfect.
You guys have had a lot of projects this past construction season, but really for the most part, the weather's been pretty good.
It has been a really, really good year. We've got really good companies working for us again. Everything's worked in our favor. So yes, just about all our contracts are completed. And yeah, they look really well.
Nice. Well, great. It's great. Does anybody have any questions, any more questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Shanks. Okay. Corporate services.
Yeah, your worship, we'll take that on.
Okay.
So one of the key things on Ms. Quinlan's report is the 2020 annual financial report, and that should be done today or tomorrow. So I
Good.
think they're just doing the wraps and we'll have that sent out to council. I mean, that's exciting news for our public to see. They have started the 2022 budget process. And they are working with all of our directors and managers on that right now. And that's really the highlights of what they're doing right now. It's that time of year budget, so they're very much in that. She does mention the seat documents, and that'll also be in the planning department, so I can discuss it now. We are at the final legs of signing off the agreements. Just to give a synopsis of it, I mean, Ms. Hartling has been the lead on it, but the major hurdle was the FCM grant. So that grant was just over $600,000 if council requires, and it's a 56-page grant agreement, and it goes through amazingly a lot of detail and stuff. So, but we are through that, and that grant is signed. That agreement is signed and sent back to FCM. Now we are just ensuring our agreement with our citizens matches the requirements of the granting program and so forth. So I know Ms. Hartling sent me the final draft version while we were sitting in this meeting. So hopefully by the end of this week, we have that wrapped up. And hopefully we have that program up and running October.
Nice.
So, I mean, that's our goal now. I mean, there's still contractor training and so forth and stuff to go through, and COVID is not helping with that either. So, but that program will be up and running by the end of the year for sure.
Councillor Narang?
And I should know the answer to this question, but it's been such a complicated process. What exactly is that $600,000 used for? Is that like the cap on the program, or is that exactly, what is it?
Yeah, so majority of the $600,000 is actually going to flow through us to the province. So for the province, which is, as council's aware, they've hired AUMA or AMSC, Alberta Municipal Services Corporation, to administer the program for the province. So they have right now, to get it off the ground, they have a pretty significant administration fee. So that grant money is going to be, majority of it is going to be used to pay that administration fee, so that does not come back on our citizens. So it makes the program affordable for our citizens, or worthwhile doing anyway. Some of that grant money goes to our administration cost here. I think it's about 25,000 goes to cover the cost for our staff time to get the program up and running. But part of the grant money goes to the reporting requirement. There's a significant reporting requirement we have to do both to FCM on the granting. So the funds are used for that too.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay. So Director or Planning and Community Development, over to you, Mr. Krause.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I think I did the highlight with the seat under that, but if council has any other questions, I'd be more than happy. Of course, Ms. Hartling has moved to planning, but we still left her as the deputy returning officer for our elections, so she's quite occupied with that too.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Fraser?
I know that we have new business licenses. I'm not sure how we, I just feel like we had a lot of new residents join us over the summer. I don't go anywhere without meeting someone saying, oh, I'm new here, or do you know where this is, or do you know where that is? Is there a way to find out how many new residents we have, or are we waiting for the census?
New residents?
It's okay if the answer is no. I just heard I felt like there were a lot of new Rockieites. I was curious about the number.
Your worship, there's probably ways we can kind of narrow that down. I don't think we'd have a 100% accurate number. I mean, just changes in utility accounts or tax certificates would be able to do that. So I'm not too sure of the work involved for our staff to pull that out of that system, but I can definitely ask.
I definitely echo your comment though, because I've also run into in my neighborhood from out of province even. So it's definitely getting a name. So. Okay, any other questions for Dean? For Mr. Schwader through Mr. Kraus? Okay, seeing none, so just a motion to accept the director's reports as presented. Councillor Phillips, all in favor? Carried. Okay, action list. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that? Winding down. Okay, seeing none, just a motion to accept the action list. Councillor Brown, all in favor? Carried. Okay, moving on to number 12. Does anybody have any administrative inquiries? Councillor Phillips?
I've got a couple. One is the new 54th Street road that's now built. At one end of the road, it's 50 kilometers an hour. At the other end of the road, it's 40 kilometers an hour.
Oh my.
Sorry. Just administrative inquiry on the 54th Street new road that's put in. There's two speed signs on that road. There's one at the beginning on the south end that says 40, and then there's one on the north end that says 50. And I think it's confusing as to where.
It's supposed to all be 40, is it not?
Your worship, no, there is a transition there on 54th. I think it's just north of the tracks, right? So to bring it back to 50 when you come back into the other portion of town. So right now, Creekside is the only residential area that's 40 kilometers. So we had to do a transition somewhere.
And that was just a trial, was it not? Creekside at 40?
Yes, it was, your worship. And I think Mr. Schwader brought back his report last December or early this year on the feedback from the citizens of Creekside. And I think he only received 2 comments on it.
So, sorry, it's 40 on which side of 11A? So it's 40, but it's 40 on 54th, just so north of Pioneer School. 30. Or 30, sorry.
30, that's schools.
No, it's not a school. It's through in front of those townhouses.
Yeah, it's 30 there too.
Yeah. So it's 30 from all the schools. That's what we had discussed, making it consistent, a consistent speed. So maybe that's something that could be brought back at a later date with another council.
Yeah, I mean, your worship, it's still a discussion on council, maybe at service level review, because Creekside was the pilot project for 40 in residential areas.
Right.
Because there is the Creekside was fairly simple to do to 40 because it's just limited roads coming in and out. Going into the other residential areas, it'd be a lot more costly because we would need signage everywhere. So wherever you turn onto a street where you're changing the speed limit, we need a sign. And even so, if you're going up 60th, for example,
Right.
every turn off there,
Right.
you would need a 40 sign. And everywhere you turn onto it, you would need a 50 sign. So the driver would know automatically that they've just turned onto a 50-kilometer street. So it's a further discussion with council for sure.
Okay, you got clarification?
Yeah, it's a little confusing as to where that transition is, because you've got 2 signs literally almost a block apart. So we're a little over a block, so it gets a little confusing when it's on the same road and there's no houses or anything on it. The other one I had was if we had any update on the meeting with on the Highway 1120, if we have any update on a potential meeting.
Your worship, so I believe I sent out
Yeah.
council an email
from maybe.
month or so ago. So Alberta Transportation, right now, they're just out to tender for a consultant for the last leg that comes into Rocky. Once, I think they hope to have that consultant in place, I believe it was October, and then they would start the public engagement portion of that. So we should have something, I would say, early in the new year on consulting of the twinning of Highway 11 into town. In the email or correspondence with Alberta Transportation, though, just to make it clear, there is no consideration of bypassing Rocky. It's coming right to our corporate boundaries, the twinning of the highway. So
Right to the boundaries, that means the lights at Rainbow Ford, or does that mean 22?
no, it means to the lights at Rainbow Ford, to our corporate boundaries.
And that's where we have to take that conversation farther and get them to go right through to Highway 22 and 11 North. That definitely needs to be relayed, because they just, I've said this to Minister McIver, I've said it, Minister Nixon, Premier Kenney went at that announcement. It's been made very clear that you cannot stop that much traffic at the corner by Rainbow Ford, and it just, it would be terrible. It's already a bottleneck as it is. So definitely that it will take more advocacy for sure.
Yeah, Your Worship, and just to follow up on that a bit, that is one thing I talked to the Deputy Minister about, was the pressures that we feel from tourism in our community, and the infrastructure, not just ours, but also the provincial infrastructure, highways being one of them, hospital being another, and the strain on our CMP detachment. So we're advocating on all sides.
Fronts, yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. Councillor Fraser.
So I was contacted over the weekend, probably because the phone lines for the federal election were busy. I had somebody who was isolating due to COVID, and there was absolutely no way for her to vote because she was not sick during the advanced vote and had planned to attend. By the time she got her positive COVID test back, the mail option was not available to her. And basically the long short of it was, there is absolutely no way for you to vote in this election. Tough luck. Which got me thinking about our own election that is coming up very shortly. And I know that we can do, we have polling stations set up at different institutions. I'm wondering if there is a way that we could have a polling station set up either at a testing site or somewhere that is able to accept people who might be sick or isolating, so they are able to vote, but they are not coming to the main polling station.
Would this be something that could be done at the institutional vote? Because we go to the hospital, correct?
Your Worship, we do, but I would really need to verify with legislation, because advanced polling and all that is established by bylaw, and we have to do it like 6 months before. So I would have to check legislation to see if there's an alternate way we can do that. I know, I can't recall where I read it, but I know for the federal elections, the restrictions were not in place. They were waived for the purpose of election. So, but I would have to, I'll have to verify for you, councillors.
Just with regards to the federal election, they actually were on the elections, federal election representatives were on CBC radio. And I happened to call in and ask them, what if I'm isolating, where can I vote? And they said, you can't vote.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm getting a series of text messages from our elections people, and they are considering a drive-through polling station at Lousopit. So you can follow up with that with council. So our staff are already on it. So.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Narang.
But how does that address mandatory isolation? If you're quarantining
I-
at home, would that,
Can we let admin look into
yeah,
this?
that's what I'm
Yeah,
needing that,
yeah.
I'm just putting that question
Sure.
out there because that's still not quarantining.
Okay, any other admin inquiries? No? Any notices of motion? No? Okay, it's 3:00. I will just call a couple minute break and then we'll come back and go into closed session.